Mr. Bevan Lee, the man behind All Saints, Always Greener, Packed to the Rafters, Winners and Losers, A Place to Call Home, and the new series Between Two Worlds, which premieres at 8:30 p.m. this Sunday, the 26th of July, after the premiere of Farmer Wants a Wife. Bevan Lee, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. Hey, none other than royalty. You're making me purr right out the gate. What can I say?
You are indeed. So many shows. Well, let's get to it. Because this is the main question. When thoughts go through your mind for a new show, you have a track record of creating hits and shows that resonate with the Australian audience. So what is the secret? What creative elements come together in your mind that you believe will then resonate with Australia?
You never set out to write a hit. You just get it starts, I think, in the zeitgeist, like, or just a sense that you get of something. All Saints, I went to hospital and was very sick, and I remember lying in hospital bed thinking, these nurses are all saints and not the doctors. And I suddenly got the idea when, if I did a medical show, it would be about nurses predominantly and not doctors. Then I hooked up with Susan Bauer, who co-created it with me, and she had been a nurse, so that was synchronicity there. Rasters, I just remember thinking there was a lot of dark stuff on the television landscape. It's a very good underbelly series, but they were very dark and nihilistic about the human condition. I thought it was time for a bit of a brighter show, and as a consequence, I sort of noticed that a lot of kids were going back under their parents' roofs, and I thought that was an interesting, it was a thing that was happening. It was an interesting place, I guess. I had just a vision of a woman on a ship going from somewhere to somewhere. I had no idea who she was, and then I just suddenly thought, there hasn't been a historical series for a while. I started to rattle around in my head, and where a lapsed Catholic Jewish convert who had survived the Second World War by being a whore in a concentration camp, who stops the closeted homosexual son of the squattocracy family from committing suicide by jumping aboard from a liner on the way back to Australia. Where that came from, I have no idea. And that is the other thing too. There is this thing that I couldn't even begin to tell you that happens. I don't know why it happens, but it just does, and you somehow get this link to another place and start developing it from there.
Well, let's start at the beginning. You were born where I am, of course, in beautiful Western Australia. I don't want to ask every detail about your childhood, but holistically, I wonder what the elements of growing up led you to your career, which I believe you're first an actor. Well, actually, you're a maths and chemistry teacher. So I wonder if you can somehow join the dots to see your life seemed to be going one way and then it was destined for another.
I had a wonderful mother and father, but I definitely did feel like a cuckoo in the nest. I don't know whether it was my gayness or, at a time when that was illegal and so therefore there was a lot more shame and sense of hidden, held in sense of exclusion in that. But I felt I was outside this warm nest and wasn't a part of it. I was an odd kid who would tend to go into my bedroom and shut the door whenever visitors came. And so I retreated a lot into fantasy. I retreated a lot into reading. No wonder I write serials. I remember the way I used to send myself to sleep as a young person was to imagine some fantasy thing in my head about a third person, Bevan, who would be doing stuff, and it would tend to do with pirate ships or, cowboys or knights and princesses or something. In my case, knights and princes. And every night I would go to sleep, and the first thing I do the next morning is remember where I left off and pick the story up that night. So I always had a serial mentality. I did terribly well at school in everything, but I did particularly well in sciences and maths. So therefore it would seem logical for me. In fact, I topped the state in physics. And it seemed logical, therefore, to go and do science at uni. 2 years into my science degree, I found my sexuality, so I spent too much time running around being a naughty young man behind my parents' backs and studying. I therefore only got a pass degree. I went to become a teacher. I was in that. I had a epiphany moment one day where I thought, I don't want to wake up at 40 staring in the mirror and seeing a 40-year-old teacher staring back at me, because I admired a lot of the teachers who had a calling, but I didn't have a calling, and I felt that would make me cynical. So therefore, I ultimately ended up, I won't give you the details, but stumbled into acting. And then I sort of came over here thinking that the next Mel Gibson was going to be born, delusion. And once I got over here, somebody said the fateful words to me at a party: "Have you ever thought of writing to supplement your income?" I contacted Grundy's, did a submission, found I had this skill I'd never written before. I found I had this skill that I never knew, which is like extrude story like toothpaste. And then I went into Grundy, and I sort of found that wonderful armchair of the future that I had always been looking for. I was lucky enough to get three marvelous mentors in there: a man called Peter Penny, who's still alive, and two who have since passed on, the amazing Reg Watson, and my major mentor, a man called Don Batty, who I cannot thank enough for what he did for me. So, and then it went on from there, and I just basically sacrificed my life to my job, worked my guts out, and 40 years later I blink and I'm a lot older, and I'm talked about as royalty. So, it's just a lot of hard work and a lot of luck, I guess.
Yeah. I believe Sons and Daughters was your first major script producing and writing credit, 170 plus episodes. So although production technology and times in general have changed, has the art of writing changed with that? Or in its simplest form, is writing for Sons and Daughters the same process for writing a show like Between Two Worlds?
I think the budgets have changed, therefore there's a lot more one can do. I mean, they used to think back then that it was somehow a conspiracy of ineptitude going on with the sort of strip serials we had. But when you had the budgets we had back then for those shows, you had to craft your story to allow it to be shootable. And so a lot of the choices you made that perhaps to those who would have liked higher quality drama, who would compare us to BBC drama, that's unfair. You had to make choices that allowed it to be shot in the way that it was shot. Now you can make bad choices and inept choices within that model, or you can make good ones. I think I found my feet, and I was being pretty clever with Sons and Daughters, and I think I did some of my best plots in Sons and Daughters, honestly, way back. But the budgets have changed, so the sort of things that I do budgetarily on Between Two Worlds, which looks $1 million, it's terribly cinematic, and the money allows me to do things in terms of cutting and location and stuff, and indeed the sort of actors we can attract. These have changed. The craft of it, the fact that it's just sheer mind-bending hard slog and gut-eating tension and neurosis, and that is I think what has changed from back in those days is now I have a wonderful set of people, incredible set of people, like my producer, Chris Mark. Well, no, not my producer, that's too proprietorial. The incredible producer, Chris Mark Jones, the amazing Chris Stenders, who's the director, the setup director on that. I have those around to make me look better, because I'm very interested in what's on the page, but I tend not to be, because I'm quite antisocial, to be as interested in the process of production itself, which is has to be quite a social human-to-human connection process. And I tend to stay beneath the parapet, beavering away on my typewriter, making sure the scripts are as good as possible, and rely on amazing like Chris and Grieve to run with that and make me look as good as my words on the page can. So those things have changed. What hasn't changed with me is I've always been inclined. See, I was a child of 19th century novels. I ate them up extraordinarily in my late teens and 20s, and so I think my creative style was formed upon Dickens and Trollope and Austen and those Thackeray and Wilkie Collins. There's a lot of mystery in Between Two Worlds and Collins, and so I think when you look at my work, I do have a style of work, and that every writer does. I mean, Salman Rushdie will never be Jackie Collins, and Jackie Collins will never be Salman Rushdie, but they're both valid in their own arena, and I have my style, and that's what I do well. And I think that Between Two Worlds is no doubt, as far as I'm concerned, I hope people agree, by far the pinnacle of what I've years. It's by far and away, as far as I'm concerned, my best show.
Okay, and we'll certainly get to Between Two Worlds in a moment, but as we flick
Yeah,
through Sons and Daughters, Home and Away, I read online that you rewrote the first episode of Home and Away, but I was actually interested to know what was it about the first script that you believed, or the network believed, needed to be reworked, because obviously whatever you did, the rest is history. What,
it was
what,
boring as batshit. It was boring as batshit. They made some really bad choices. It was incredibly boring. Look, the way it happened was 3 weeks out from shoot, John Holmes, who was an old mate of mine from Sons and Daughters days, and who I've gone on to have an incredible, one of the great creative associations of my career, along with wonderful Julie McGoran, later on. And John was working with the rather notorious then Alan Bateman, who I'd never met, and John was 3 weeks out of shooting the show with the director Rick Pelizzeri, and they agreed that the script just wasn't up to snuff. And John went to Alan and said, look, there's a guy I think can doctor it, and he said my name. I'd sort of made some professional choices then that had got me a bit of a bad name, because I'd actually got rid of some people from Sons and Daughters whose noses got out of joint. I thought I got rid of them for good reasons. They thought I hadn't got, but I got a bit of a reputation for being a bit of a tough bust, because I think the show comes before individuals. Quite frankly, it's not a pension plan. So I got rid of these people who are coasting along. So the first thing Alan said to me when I was brought in was, "I hear you're a bit of a bastard," and I am not. I think I'm actually a bit of a gentle soul. I'm just sort of very Teutonic and think the choices have to be made that have to be made. And so Alan did this to me, and I didn't know what way to reply. And so I sort of suddenly heard myself saying, "Yeah, I hear you are too." And he was a very senior person in the business, and he laughed, and he liked the fact that I fired back at him. And from that point on, we got on really well. He became a mentor for a period of time, and he asked me what I thought of the script. I said it was terribly boring. They made some fundamentally wrong choices. So he then said, "Can you doctor it?" I said, "No, I can't, because if I doctor this script, all I will give you is a better bad script. It's got too many core problems to it." So I said, "If you are prepared to throw it out the window, delay production for 3 weeks, I will go away and use exactly the same sets, exactly the same locations, exactly the same characters, but I will write you a new opening telly movie that I believe will work." And he agreed to that. They delayed production 3 weeks. And I was sort of sitting at home on Scotland Island, madly feeding pages into the amusingly then fax machine to get the thing up and shot. And that's what happened. I mean, it was a crazy time. But so I never say I created Home and Away, because that would be wrong, because a lot of work was done on it before I came along, but I certainly recreated it. And then I was the script producer for the first 18 months, and then Alan left, and John and I followed Alan across the Channel 9.
I'm just writing down a headline for podcast. Bevan Lee says the original Home and Away was boring as batshit. There we go. That's a good headline.
Oh yeah. Oh, don't make it a headline. I mean, I'm only joking. I have a habit of being really honest in these interviews. So I don't see the point of me coming into these interviews and just sort of like spitting out pro forma bullshit. Yeah. And I tend to be quite honest. And I've been to interviews before, and I got myself. I won't say what I said, but I got myself really in trouble where I actually had an interview with a journo who I thought the interview was over, and they asked me the question, "What do you think of the Australian film industry?" And thinking the interview was over, I had very set opinions upon the Australian film industry at that time. And I made some statements which had nothing to do with the point of the interview. And so the headline came out emblazoning my statement about the film industry. And so I tend to get myself into trouble. I call it my interview Tourette. So yeah, let's just say, I believe these things, and I believe in saying them as long as they're not being cruel to people. But yeah, that's how this was. I think I would prefer the headline which started with royalty. We'll go back to royalty, shall we?
I'll pick up where you said you went to Nine. Some might have been surprised, but you got Home and Away obviously off the ground and left Seven after 18 months and went to Nine, where I imagine that was your time where you did Water Out to RTS and Halifax and things.
Yeah, but I wanted to establish the basis on which I did that. I went over there with Alan because Alan said to John and me, "I'll go to Nine." He sang this siren song of "Let's go over there and make this amazing new show." And we went over there and we made this show that I've had three stinkers in my career. I think all of them had some merit to them, but all of them had reasons for not working. And the first stinker was Family and Friends, a show at Channel 9, which didn't work, and it was really flawed. And so then after that, when Alan got booted from 9, the two people that 9 kept, John Holmes went on to Channel 10, they kept me and Janine Faithful, another old chum from back in the day. And I sort of hung around there because it was sort of comfort and it was good. I liked the people there and it was comfort. And I sort of became a script sort of, in inverted commas, executive. I would look at other people. So I worked with Water Rats, I worked with Halifax, I worked with all of those shows. Murder Core, I think, was one of them. As the sort of guy in the network who was Chris Noble's sort of like script sidekick. And look, I did it because it sort of it became the comfort trap. And it was the easy place to be. And then I got cancer and I survived cancer. And I suddenly thought, what the hell am I doing here? Just sort of not creating, but sitting here and writing notes on other people's work. And that's when Alan Bates came a calling. After that period of assessment, came a calling and said, I'd like you to come over to 7 and create a medical series for us, which became All Saints. So that period I would call my creative downtime. And, it was, I have some happy memories of it, but I also feel that they were creatively wasted years. But I don't know, maybe reading all those. In those years, I read a hell of a lot of things that showed me how not to write. I'm not talking about shows that got made. I used to have to assess projects that came in. And trust me, submitted projects are 90% exercises in self-delusion. So you're reading 10% of good stuff, and you can see what this good stuff is in extra. I learned a shitload more from the project, the 90% projects that were just dreadful. And I won't do that. I won't do that. I won't do that. I won't do that. So it was maybe a learning period as well. So I have happy memories because of some of the people there, but it was a bit of a blank in my creative career for sure.
Well, when you returned to 7 as network script executive, and John Holmes returned to 7 also as head of drama, the two of you obviously created a number of shows, including All Saints. But so tell me about this partnership with John Holmes, because it seems very important.
It's a partnership based on total trust. Writers are all paranoid, especially when they get overworked. And I have spent, I am a workaholic, and so I can get overworked. And John was the person I trusted to always tell me the truth. And I think sometimes I told these 90% said about these 90% writers. Sometimes writers need somebody to say to them, you think it's good, but it's not. I mean, no, he writes, and everybody who writes something thinks it's good, or else you wouldn't have written it. But you need that person who you trust, like Julie McGorrin does now, who can say to you, you haven't got it this time, Bev. And you know that it's being said to you for only one reason, and that is because it's true, not because there's a second agenda and all that sort of stuff. And trust me, the business I'm in is riddled with second agendas. And so the total trust with John. He is a wonderful, decent, funny, I can't rave about John enough as a person. He's a wonderful guy. And we formed this bond, and he would laugh at I'm eccentric, and so he would laugh at my reasonably endearing eccentricities, and I would, I'd laugh at his funny jokes, and we mucked along together, really trusting each other, and that, and in showbiz, I'm being lucky. I found him, then I found Julian McGorrin then I found Chris. I find 3 people who are all decent and all whom you can trust. I mean, I'm triple blessed. Yeah. And I need that because my true skill is storytelling. My true skill is the page. It's not interpersonal skills. It's not, I'm a storyteller. And those people I knew would have my back, and those people I knew would facilitate me to the best of the degree they could to realize whatever my, in inverted commas, which sounds wanky, vision is. And so, I've been a lucky bugger. And so, back to John, he's an amazing guy.
Well, going in a different direction now, I definitely have a show in mind, very passionate about that fits this category. Is there a show you created or wrote that you think finished too early for whatever reason? It might have been poor ratings, network decision,
Oh,
whatever it is.
always greener, full stop.
Oh
Always
my
greener.
goodness, yeah, that is definitely the one. Always greener. That was my number one.
Yeah, yeah. Broke my heart. Broke my heart. It was a wild, silly, funny, wacky show. I think it was cancelled on like about 1.4 million or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was a good figure. The same as the Place to Call Home was finished at 7 on about I think 1.2 million. I mean, it dipped for 1 week. It dipped to about 800 and something because it had some huge thing against it, and that was the figure that used to drive me nuts. That's the figure the press would quote as the reason why it had been cancelled. For 1 week against major opposition, it dropped. The other week, other times it was all above a million. There was that died not on ratings, it died on money and politics. But always greener. Look, it was a lovely show. It was without being too saccharine. At the age of 50, I found I've been very lucky with love in my life, but I found the great love of my life. We're not together, but he's still the great love of my life. And I found this love, and I remember saying, and I don't want your podcast listeners to vomit, but I remember saying in one of my sort of like more high-flowing romantic moments to Jamie, you took the sun out of the sky and put it into my heart so I could shine it onto the page. Although that is fairly sort of vomitously hallmark card, it is true. I mean, he turned a dreadful cynic into an optimistic cynic. And out of that, if you look at Always Greener, it's a show that's both tart and sweet. And its eccentricities, it flips between both, and it has all those sort of flights of fancy and stuff like that. So I think that died too soon because it was very different. It was very unique. You know, it won the note the bitter tone in my voice. It won the. It was nominated for an international Emmy for best drama in the year which the AFI, by the way, didn't even bother to nominate in the best drama category. In brackets, no business there. Ha ha ha. I don't think so. Look, it was a wonderful, delightful show, and it died too soon.
I did wonder if we're on the same page with it. Yeah, it was definitely Always greener. So you did mention A Place to Call Home. I mean, in the media, we sort of had it that it was rating right to 7, but not in the right demographic. But anyway, the loyal fan base were very loud, and Foxtel picked up the show, and it obviously had a rest of a successful run. Was that a good feeling that the fans had some push in the return of the show?
That was interesting. Yeah, look, it was wonderful that they rose up and stormed barricades. I mean, I think there's a shocking ageism in the attitude to perish. It's just enormous ageism. I mean, old pricks don't count is the whole attitude to these young millennials wandering around advertising offices. I mean, old people don't have money to spend. And so there's this whole attitude that if you're in this, you're valid. And we had a huge amount of people in that, and therefore, for some unknown reason, this sort of ageist bullshit landscape. Somehow they couldn't sell time or something. For God's sake, fill it up with ads for Depend pads. I mean, you're going to get people rushing to the chemist to buy them. But no, we had an older audience. That was a joke, by the way. Yeah. We had an older audience, and it was a very fierce audience. And this show has an incredibly loyal and fierce following around the world. I just got to, honestly, I'm not making this up just for this podcast. I got a message from my friend in the States today to say he'd gone for a trip to get out of COVID-ridden LA to Washington State, and was sitting in this sort of like place, and this woman who was there, seeing he was Australian, said, "Oh, do you know of this show called A Place to Call Home?" And I've had a number of my friends who all around the world have gone to places, and the people they run into, the show that they say, "Have you heard of this?" is A Place to Call Home. So it has got this incredibly loyal following around the world, maybe of old people, but it's sold in 120 countries. It's done incredibly well. So I don't know. I still don't get that somehow or other these people, just because they crank over a certain age, maybe, it makes the show less valid. I mean, I think it's sad because I think there was some incredibly important things that a younger demographic could have learned from watching the show, given the fact that it was very, went into, homophobia back in those days, and, the fact that a lot of gay people were given electric shock treatment to try and change them. It went into anti-Semitism. It went into racism. It went into classism. It is probably one of the most, inverted commas, woke show over its 6 years that's been on Australian television. But somehow or other, the younger demographic did not wake up to the woke show. So
I'm starting to feel a little bit old now because I'm only in my late 30s and I've watched every single episode of A Place to Call Home and loved it. So am I too old?
All the young people who watched it that I know of, I mean, the sort of like the tales I tell is, all the young people who watched it. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to tell you a story though. And this is what I think happened with the industry. And it might be me trying to justify myself, but I think this is what happened with A Place to Call Home in the industry or amongst certain, hip groups. I wanted to write the anti-Mills and Boon show. In other words, I wanted to take all the tropes of the sort of Mills and Boon romantic fiction, and then I wanted to subvert them. And I think what happened with that show was it went to air and it was promoted, fair enough, I'm not criticising promos, it was promoted in a fairly sort of like Mills and Boony romantic fiction way, and they promoted away from the tough edge stuff that the show was full of. So I think anybody coming and forming a judgment on the show from just the promos would have thought that it was a bit of costume frock, saccharine stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I came across this on a panel because I can be a bit bolshy when I'm prodded. I came across this on a panel once where a guy on the panel said in a slightly, or to my ear, patronising tone, "Oh, blah 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 drama, not like the soft and mushy or gentle or whatever stuff, I can't remember his words, like Seven drama makes."
Yeah.
Like Pax of the Rafters and A Place to Call Home. And I don't think he meant to be offensive, but I'm sitting on the panel thinking, F you see. Because I really flared. I thought, how dare you have the gall and the rudeness to sit on this panel and say this when I'm the guy who created this show? And I thought, no, I'm going to challenge this. And I said to him, I said, you haven't watched A Place to Call Home, have you? And he looked, I said, no. You can't have watched it, because if you'd watched it, there's no way you could describe it as a safe and gentle drama. I said, it's a very tough, hard-edged drama. And I did that rap where I just told you about the woman and the whore and the closet gay guy jumping over the edges. I said, how you cannot describe a show that is that narrative as a soft and safe drama. So I said, I am asking you now, in front of this audience, have you watched my show or not? And he shamefacedly mumbled out no, that he hadn't. And I just zinged him and I said, you watch my show, you can look me in the face and say whatever negatives you want about it, because that is your right. But how dare you get up on this platform and diss my show when you haven't watched a minute of it? And I think that, in my head, is what went wrong with Place. A lot of people dismissing it in their mind because they made a pre-assumption about what it was. Now, I've done that with shows myself before. But one of the interesting things to me is any young person who's come to it, getting back to the young person thing that led me off onto this diatribe, and wound, any young person who watched it all said, oh, we really liked it, in a surprised voice. And I remember one of my friends saying to me, oh, I watched your show the other day. It's very good, isn't it, with this really surprised tone in the voice. My attitude is, oh, well, yeah, thank you. So that, I think, it had a preconception to it, but people who watched it immediately saw the preconception was not so.
Yeah. And let's go into...
I actually had an example last night. I watched the first episode of Morning Wars, which I'd been, avoiding watching because I thought it was just going to be certain something. And then I watched the first episode last night and I loved it. And I went, oh, it's not what I expected to be at all. It's fantastic. I thought it was going to be sort of like really overly hashtag PC, bit of flag waving, but it's wonderfully exciting, beautifully written, and very nuanced in terms of the things it's dealing with. So I can be guilty of it too. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those people. We all do that with shows. We all make a preconception, but I think that's what Place suffered from.
I'm writing that recommendation down, that one. Going into another zone, I'm just wondering how important the actor is to the script. I mean, can you have the perfect script and an average actor and still make it work? I ask that because you've obviously worked with the likes of Georgia Parker, Ann Teddy, John Howard, Rebecca Gidney, Noni Hazelhurst, Eric Thompson. In programming a network, they say it's content. What is it for developing a show? Are all the elements, production, scripts, actors, locations, weighed the same, or is the script the most important thing, or the actor the most important thing?
Oh no, I could write the best script in the world, and the wrong actors could come in and trample all over it. I don't want to keep going back to between. Look, I've been really fortunate. Marta and Noni came out, especially Noni, because I had a totally different idea in my head about what Elizabeth would be, and then Noni came in and gave this fantastic audition, but a really different read, and then the rest was history. And I thank God she came in and brought what she brought to it, which was sort of better in execution. And I think the script was really good, but I think her execution made it even better. Marta came in and gave exactly what I expected, and deliriously and gloriously so. So there was no surprises there, but there was certainly, So having people like them come in, and without them taking material and bringing what they bring to it, it doesn't matter. I could write the best script in the world, and could come up, like, especially because I write melodrama, and I proudly say I write melodrama. That's the 19th century novel with me. There's nothing wrong with melodrama. I think melodrama is a fantastic form, and I think it's wrongly looked down on by a lot of people who mute their drama for fear of becoming melodrama. So if an actor comes in and plays my show with a wink and a nod, and my shows with a wink and a nod to the screen, then they're intolerable. The only way, like between two worlds, Philip, Hermione, Sass, the young people, they all came in, Blazy Bass, they all came in and they took this show that is pretty heightened and rich, and they played it for the complete truth of it. But the truth of Between Two Worlds is the truth of a situation like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It's the truth of the situation of Prince Andrew in the palace. It's the truth of the situation of Johnny Depp and Amanda Heard, isn't it? It's the truth of that sort of thing. And there's this whole, with so much of Australian drama, there's this whole muting. If we don't go there and take the emotions and to the height, then we're actually having people as they really are. Well, that's nonsense. That's not how people often are. And if the actors, going back to the actors, came into my shows and played it as camp, then it would be intolerable. But they came in and they embraced the truth of that world. And it's not an invalid truth. It could happen. I'm sure it has happened in the homes of certain very wealthy people, certain versions of it. But they play it with an embracing of the truth, just as I don't go, I'll be really camp and write melodrama. I sit down and go, I want to write a rich, heightened story. And so the marriage, if I get the wrong actor, my text can sound pretty fruity. But if I get the right actor, it sounds like really Rip Norton stuff. Now, Philip gave me a beautiful compliment. I'm not trying to be arrogant and say I'm Shakespeare, for God's sake, but Philip, who's done a lot of classic theatre, said to me of my dialogue, which I wanted to write really rich text. I didn't want to have people talking in mundanities. He said he was really enjoying with my dialogue on the show because he said, you write rich text. You don't write, you write words like marbles in the mouth to be negotiated and got out in the way that they should be. And so that was a beautiful compliment from somebody like him who dealt with so many classic texts, who recognized that I think you can give actors very, very rich text, very, very metaphorical, metaphor-filled, rhythmic text, but you get the wrong actor, unlike an actor unlike Philip who can't play it, and it sounds like death by word diarrhea. So yeah, it is essential, I think, given the way I write and the inverted commas in my more melodramatic shows like Place and this one, that I have actors who can negotiate the dialogue and make me sound as I intend to sound. Yeah.
Do you actually get a say in casting? Because I can imagine when you're writing something in your mind, you're thinking this, like you're sort of picturing, for example, Marta Dusseldorf or something like that. Do you get then, I've written this script and I think you should go down this path. Do you have any say in casting?
Yeah, I'm there. I mean, wonderful Anne Fay, of course, with Between Two Worlds. They come up. She comes up with the ideas. Her and Lee, Offsider, they come up with ideas to put at us. Then you've got, Julie, you've got Chris, you've got the director, the setup director, Chris Stenders. They're there, of course. But for some roles, I had somebody in my head. I had who did I have? Sass Wiseman as Sophia in Between Two Worlds. I always wanted her, but I can't go in, nor should I be able to go in and say, I want Sass to play that role. I went in and I said I'd had Sass in my head as I've written this. I told Sass that I was writing something for her, but she's a sensible enough professional to know that's no guarantee, that I can't guarantee that. Dominic Auburn, a young actor who I think is a very, very good young actor. I actually wrote the role of Bart in the show for him, but the show was so long in development that he sort of aged out of being able to do that. And I really liked Dom's work, so I wanted him in it. So I actually created a character that comes in very briefly at the beginning of the show. Yeah. But then by the end of the 10 hours has become a major character. And I said, I see Dom doing this. Equally so, Dom had to come in and audition. So I can say what I think, but I could be terribly wrong. I mean, the thing with Noni, I had always seen Wendy Hughes in my head. And then Noni came in and gave this totally different reading that was, I don't mean to be rude, rest in peace, Wendy, but I think Noni came in and gave a shitload better interpretation than probably Wendy ever would have. Interesting. Going back to Always Greener, I'd had various people in my head, and John Holmes said, what about how awful, John.
John Howard and
John Howard. Yeah. What about John Holmes and John Howard? John Howard. What about John Howard? And I went, I don't see John. John came in and he suddenly, once he had read it, it was like you couldn't imagine anybody else. So yes, I can have vision, but I love being proved right, but I also equally love deliciously being proved maybe wrong in the task. So it's collaborative. We all get together and we can be of a mind, or if we're not of a mind, we have a respectful stoush about it.
Yeah. Different tact, and I just find this a fascinating question. I don't know if you do. I was wondering if there was a time you had a storyline that you had wrote and that you were talked out of by the network, or vice versa. The network wanted to go in a different direction, and you ultimately stuck your heels in to go in a different direction. I ask this because I wonder if there was a sliding doors moment where someone, for example, they'd actually originally planned to kill Alf Stewart off Home and Away in the first 12 months, but it was blocked, and then the rest is history. Is there a storyline from any show that stands out that if it was heading in its original direction, we would have missed out on ...
Who told you they were going to? I created the first 18 months of storylines, and as far as I'm concerned, there was never any intention of killing.
No, that was that was definitely a hypothetical.
Oh, you just made that example.
Yeah, I made that example.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if there was a show where we know classic, how it's gone.
Yeah. No, classic, massive one. I said, I was working on All Saints. I was going, something's not right, and something's missing, blah, 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 blah. And I came up with this idea, and I went to John and told him, and he went, I really love it. And then we went to the programmer with it at that time, and he didn't, but we stuck our ground and the rest was history. And it was the decision to make Georgie Parker's character a nun.
Oh.
Now, that show would have been utterly different if Georgie's character had not been a nun. I wanted Erst, and I thought, in this day, why a sensible nurse, why on earth can't she, at least have casual sex, for God's sake, why can't, blah, blah, blah. And there'll be all the old-fashioned tropes of why she can't, she's too busy, or she's got a kid, or she's that. And then he said to John, if she was a nun, she couldn't have sex, could she? No. And then he said, I think the words were something, and I don't mean to be rude to the guy, but my memory is the words were something jokingly naff, like, oh, nuns aren't fuckable. But that's the sort of, I'm not accusing it, that's the sort of silly nonsense you say when you're in a relaxed room, for God's sake, giving responses. But there was a bit like, well, she's a nun, so if she's not, they didn't see the tension in it. They saw rather and I think that show would not have been anywhere near as successful if George's character had not been a nun, and then we couldn't have done that story with Eric coming in later on, which was Susan's suggestion, that story, of Eric coming in and then having had the history before she went in to become a nun, and so she wasn't a virgin, and they had the tension between them. So that would have been a huge change. I've had stories that, rightly or wrongly, I've been told I had a big one I really wanted to do on A Place to Call Home, and the Foxtel felt that it. I didn't think it did, but Foxtel felt that it changed that it might have been a bit jumping the shark, and so I respected that. They felt that. I felt I could have done it without jumping the shark, but it's their show, so I was happy to find another direction, and the other direction paid off very well anyway. So yeah, I mean, they're the client, so I think if they feel uncomfortable with the story, but I'll certainly fight it if I was happy to jettison that one because I could actually think of a better one, but I wouldn't have been happy to jettison the nun thing because I felt that I could see the benefit of that. So yeah, that's part of the normal process.
I'm glad I asked that one now. I didn't know about the nun thing.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question.
Let's talk about a show that no one's probably ever heard of, one of your smaller shows called Packed to the Rafters.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering at what point you thought this was big. I mean, it could have been at the early stages of thinking. It could have been after you secured the cast. It could have been after watching the pilot, or it could have been after the first night's ratings came in. It was this 2 million business. Was there glimpses at any stage that you were onto something big?
I felt, and John felt, we had lightning in a bottle. The network was very nervous. Look, the network's been very nervous about all of my shows, pretty much. Some of them with, like Headland and Martial Law, with good reason. But I was uneasy about both of those shows too, because I didn't feel they were coming together for various reasons, which we won't go into. But I felt with Rafters we had lightning in a bottle. We had Eric, we had Rebecca, we had the wonderful young cast. I thought, but most of my shows, that was ahead of the zeitgeist at that point. The network were nervous because I've always said Rafters is a stick of fairy floss with a huge dollop of lemon juice in the centre. And it is. It's a flummery of a show, but it also has a very tart edge. And so the network, I think, at a time when Underbelly and those more savage shows were the ratings ones, they were very, very nervous that it was too slight. And so, success has a million fathers and failure has none. So, of course, when it came out and it was a success, everybody was walking around and good on them saying that they always knew it was going to be one. But no, they didn't. They were very nervous. Not unsupportive, but they were nervously unsupportive, whereas we felt we had lightning in a bottle, and that proved to be so. We never dreamt it would rate what it did. We felt it would be a comfortable success, and then it came out the gates, and that sort of threw us. I think we're being modest, but then that created its own set of problems because nobody was interfering when it was just in development, and nobody was interfering, in the stuff that we'd done. But once it was a success, then people became feel that success would be hurt in some way. So, I think the first 6 or 7 months of that show were the best of the show because nobody interfered and we just did what our instincts told us. And then from that point on, everybody started to get nervous and there was sort of more and more as time went by second guessing to let's not have any storyline that might offend the family viewers. Then, of course, we came to the famous, what I call Mastergate, which was the storyline I did, like to this day I stand by because I think it was a really good story about the son who is married to the attractive wife, but he forms fantasies for his co-worker at the office and comes home one night and his wife makes it clear that she wouldn't mind some sexual contact. He slides off that, goes into the bathroom, and she walks into the bathroom, which he has not locked the door, inadequately locked the door, and she walks in and sees that he is masturbating, fantasizing about this woman at work, and she says to him, we have some, and it's a story about marriage, about young marriage, about, and it was based totally upon a story that happened to friends of mine. I saw nothing wrong with the story. I thought the world was pretty together about masturbation, quite frankly, by the time we got to that stage. And the show went to air and the heavens opened. The shock jocks got onto it. The conservative religious groups were calling in. And the headline was, Rafters betrays family audience. And I'm sitting there going, what's family audience? It's a family show, but it was never written for a family audience. It is a show about family, and this is a ballad story about family. So to not go on about that too much, that sort of indicated the audience on that show sort of hijacked the show. Mm. And they started saying stuff like the Rafters wouldn't do that. They so over-identified with the show that they went, the Rafters wouldn't do that. Well, no, you wouldn't do that, but you're not the Rafters. And you put your heart and soul in something, and you work 70-hour weeks, and you kill yourself, and you write a good, honest story. We were even chastised by the bloody broadcasting authority on that, and the network, for God's sake, on a story as that benign, while bloody Underbelly was having tits and pole dancers and rape and murder, left, right, center. We were the ones who got a fine for that benign little story. We didn't show anything frank.
For the people that are listening and wondering when we're getting to Between Two Worlds, we're getting there. But because we're talking about Back to the Rafters, you're obviously...
By the way, I don't sound too... I know I'm being really honest here. I hope I don't sort of sound too sort of like frenetically bullshit. I just wanted to be honest about the creative process. And okay, good.
No, absolutely. Thanks. It's just we're talking about lots of things. But with Rafters, obviously there's going to be the sequel Back to the Rafters. I just wanted to ask how that's going. Just with COVID-19 restrictions, has it already been shot, or are they halfway? And what?
No, they shot. I think about six. They shot about 6 weeks. They shot 4 episodes. Some scenes within, I think, episodes 3 and 4 were not shot for various scheduling reasons, so they haven't been shot. So episodes 1 and 2, I think, have been finished. 3 and 4 can't be finished until that extra material is shot. And 5 and 6 haven't been shot at all. So when they will reconvene and do that, I don't know. So that's a bit of a trick, yeah.
I see the whole cast is back, obviously minus Jessica Murray. There's always this good old debate about, isn't there, about recasting versus dropping a character and saying the character's living in England or something. Changing the face of the character, people have grown to love it, can be a challenge. Do you know the thoughts behind the decision to recast as opposed to, she's living in England?
Well, we couldn't rewrite. We were in the tunnel, so we couldn't rewrite. I said I wouldn't go back and do the show. I could be honest and say I didn't want to go back and do the show. I found a reason plot-wise to go back and revisit. I revisited it. When it first came up, I didn't want to do it. I've got a reason in my head to go back to want to do it. And I think I've told an interesting story that is worth telling. Had I not found that story, I wouldn't have done it. Probably to do with the disaffection that I had felt out the back of the original series. Yeah. I had a story I think that's really worth telling, a story that's of the now, and it is Rafters tonally, but it does say interesting things about the world today. But I did say I wouldn't come back unless we had everyone. So they got everyone. Then, of course, we were, just days out from shooting, and Jess had to make the call that she had to make for her own well-being, which everybody understood. Yeah. We then clearly had no choice but to recast, and we found Georgina Haigh, who, is doing a wonderful job and has slotted in. So I think the audience will know why, so they will come to it, I believe, in goodwill. Hey, listen, the best piece of recasting was back in the days of Restless Years, when there was an actress who got a bit above herself, and Reg Watson was a bit like me, I think, a man who a very kind man, but a man who will not take any nonsense and will call nonsense out. And this young actress had behaved badly, and when Reg set out to tick her off, apparently she responded in a way that he didn't feel was acceptable. And she sort of said something, I believe, in the apocryphal story. I'm not quoting, I'm just telling apocryphal stories. Well, you can't fire me anyway. I'm too important to the show, sort of thing. So Reg went down to the writing department and said, write in a scene for this character of she goes to the hairdresser, and they put the misbehaving actress under a hairdryer to have a change of hair colour, and when the hood raised up, the dark-haired performer was now a blonde performer played by a completely different actress, and the show went on. Oh. So, and the audience continued with the show without a blink. So I think if recasting is done either with that degree of campish brio, or if it's done with, relative sensitivity to find a good performer like Georgina, who physically does lie within the same parameters, I think you'll pull it off. I mean, I think if it's done cynically, then you probably won't, or done ineptly. But I think, who could not go for something as camp as stick one actress under a hairdryer and bring another actress out? Yeah.
Can I ask? Because I'm sure fans would know the answer to this question. They've put out about back to the rafters, and the cast is back. Are you able to confirm or deny a couple of other actors that had pivotal roles in the series? Because that hasn't been mentioned. Ones I'm thinking of, ones like James Stewart as Jake, Ryan Core, Zoe Crammond, who played Emma, Brooke Satchwell and Christian Schmidt were at the end, and then there was Carbo's wife, Loretta, that was in the show. Are any of these sort of characters that you know of back in the show?
Loretta is back briefly, but Hannah, who plays Loretta, now lives and is married with a child in New Zealand, and so we have Loretta in for a few brief scenes. We register her presence in Carbo's life, but we were not in a position to write her in more than that, simply because of Hannah's availability. The other characters, look, we're coming back. It's called Back to the Rafters, but it's Back to the Rafters. Yeah. And those characters were, I would call, rafters spill. And I think if you go back and all you do is you pick up everybody and you move on, then all you sort of really do is, I didn't want to come back and just do some sort of like dogged continuation of, I wanted to come back and see that their lives had changed significantly in the intervening 6 years, how it had changed, and then put a dilemma into that around the central rafters with some new characters thrown in to make it a bit interesting, something a bit fresh. We bring Donna back too, by the way, Julie's friend, because Meredith is just delicious comedy. But characters like Jake and Cobby and Ryan's character and apart from that, Jimmy is in Home and Away anyway, so he can't be across both shows. So there were good reasons. There were good narrative reasons too. I wasn't interested in picking up in some sort of as though the show never stopped and just sort of like dribbling and eking out. And I knew I could, because I had lost, because the thing that I've shared with you, that I had lost my mojo for the show. The only way I could actually come back and get a mojo back was to sort of do this slightly recreative thing where you put them 6 years down the track, and Ruby's now a 9-year-old, and and they've got friends. They're in a country town, and they've got friends in the country town, so the kids are in the city, and it's about a fracturing family. We were Packed to the Rafters was about a fractured family coming back together under the same roof. Back to the Rafters is about a fractured family coming to terms, especially Julie, with what does it mean to you when what does it do to your soul if that fracturing starts to erode to being a family. And I thought that was worth saying in this day and age when the notion of family is, and that was a sort of like thematic thing that I started to build what people will see as the narrative. And had I not found that, I wouldn't have come back. Somebody else could have come in and done it, and good luck to them. But we were going to bring back people like Ryan and a couple of the other characters, and just as a sort of homage to the show, in the final scene, in the final episode, when it got to doing that, we examined that original idea. First of all, Ryan wasn't available. And it was a very brief appearance. It was almost like we hoped they'd come in and do a nod to, well, we were part of this show, and so we're happy to just be here in this scene as some sort of like guest brief, cameo homage.
Yeah.
The notion didn't work out in the way that I thought would have made it valid, so we did jettison that. And those people did wonderful jobs on Rachel has moved on in New York to a different life, and Jake is out of her life for various reasons. We picked, probably, actually, I don't think it isn't even mentioned, because it's what happens in life. Yeah. People move on. We move on with our life, and people are left behind. So I didn't want to. I did that to allow myself to come back to it, because without that, especially because I just done Between Two Worlds, which was the pinnacle of my career and of my achievement, and psychologically to go from the pinnacle of my achievement back to a former creation that I had become disaffected from, and sort of try to revisit it in some way, that was a huge psychological struggle for me.
Yeah. Well, we're all
which I think I succeeded in. I think I succeeded in pulling it off, but time will tell.
Yeah, and the Australian audience can't wait for it. Obviously, it's much anticipated. I want to go completely.
Yeah, look. I hope it's interesting going with Amazon, because they have their own. It will be Amazon's rafters. It won't be Seven's rafters. It's been shaped through an Amazon lens, and so it will be interesting to see. One hopes it's a great success for them.
For sure.
Time will tell.
On a complete 180, your Wikipedia page, we're going to Wikipedia, always the trusted source of information. It says
Yeah.
Lee is openly gay, and in 2007 he was nominated as one of the 25 most influential lesbian and gay people in Australia by online digital media site Same Same. Were you involved in a particular gay rights movement, or is the influential part linked to the fact that you were a gay person in an influential role in Australia?
I think I'm a gay person who's never made any secret of. Early on, of course, I made a secret of it, because you had to. Otherwise you'd have shit beaten out of you at school. I think some kids deal with that these days, despite supposedly the world being more open. But there was shame, there was secrecy. My father never knew I was gay. How the hell not, given the fact he met all my boyfriends. But people were blind. These days it's gay, choose you a gay. Back then, an ordinary suburban bloke like my father, because I used certainly my partner through the 20s, and I used to have a lot of very glamorous young female friends, because I love women. I'm just not sexually attracted to them. I like to say that I love the table setting. I just don't want to eat the meal. And so we had lots of beautiful female friends who were always there. So I think my dad thought that my then partner, Fred, who's still my longest friend in life, that we were living the life of the bachelor gay as distinct from the gay. And so because people didn't suspect gayness back then. It wasn't, it didn't you didn't get images on television. So I managed to sort of like sail through. But once I went into the workplace, working at certainly going to theatre, who cares, and then going to Grundy's where all my mentors were gay. I didn't feel that I didn't sort of walk in and flounce around and talk about my weekend sexual antics or anything nonsensical like that. But then I don't think, nor should anybody, gay, straight or whatever. Yeah. But slowly but surely, once I started to do my own shows, there's been gay characters to a greater or less extent in all of my shows. I mean, I think the pinnacle of my gay storytelling is the 6-season arc of the story of James Bly, which is a major gay story. But that came after. I think I got it back then. I don't know. I think they just cast around for a few names to whack up there and make it look good. And the pin landed on me, I guess, when they sort of dangled it over who's who. And it was nice to feel that, maybe some young gay creative out there. But, my great attitude though is I haven't ever written a gay piece because I write commercial television. And I don't think that I am beholden to the people who I write for, who put the money forward to write something I think that will rate. And overall, a show that is gay, even today, is niche. And it's not, when I'm paid to create a commercial show, I think I am obliged to not do things that will push it into niche, which will get as high as rating as possible. But in all of my shows I put gay, what I like about them is I'm a bit like Mary Poppins, and a spoonful of sugar will help make them go down. So a lot of the social media made my heart sing on A Place Called Home, where people go, oh, those poor gay people have had it tough over the years, haven't they? Or a young gay person will write, I never knew that happened. Because so many young gay people these days have no bloody idea about our history. Yeah. They have no idea in the 50s that families were sending their sons into institutions for shock therapy and in the worst cases, lobotomies to actually change their behaviour. And that is true. And that story was all based upon researched fact. So it makes my heart sing that my audience, hopefully over the years, have got through my spoonful of sugar, that is the commercial show, and have come to the message I have inside. And that is, a lot of people don't like gay people until they meet one. And then they go, oh, those gays aren't bad, really, are they? Because they just think that we're madly sex obsessed. People rushing around and in a lot of cases thinking that we're pedophiles, for God's sake. Despite the fact that statistics say that most pedophilia takes place within the family unit with heterosexuals, but that's beside the point. And so, it's to me, I have worked very hard to get the message where I think it's important to those people who don't know gay people. And maybe through the show, like with James Bly, they now know a gay person and they've felt empathy for a gay person. I mean, I think most gay, very specifically gay-made pieces of television or film, which I might love to watch myself, overall are preaching to the converted, because nobody's going to turn them on who are not of that mindset. So, and I'm not diminishing people for doing that. I mean, I've seen lots of things I love, myself, but they do preach to the converted. And my slightly insidious thing through my career is to try to plant a seed of empathy minds. Yeah. There are those that you'll never make empathetic, and they're the ones who drip vile vitriol in messages that talk about gays should die, but you're never going to get through to them anyway.
Yeah, this is actually taking me back to, that was some of the most powerful stuff I've seen on TV, the James Bly story. It was, I wasn't obviously through an era when that kind of thing happened, so watching it now, it just seems, the fact that could have happened just seems completely barbaric, and it was very, very hard to watch.
It did my head in a bit at the time. The gay press never picked up on that storyline, which disappointed me a little. It existed, but never slightly got out to the wide gay viewership that it existed. I think it's one of the best gay storylines there's ever been on Australian television, he says immodestly. And so, yeah, that sort of disappointed me. And it also, that particular storyline, I think, shows the thumbs the nose of that particular gentleman once again, who sat on that platform and described the show as, soft and fuzzy.
Okay, so there's a little show that you have created called Between Two Worlds. I was saving the best for last.
Thanks, mate.
I've watched the first 3 episodes thus far. So obviously first tell the listeners the basic premise of the show. What is Between Two Worlds?
Between Two Worlds is well, first of all, it's a rip-snorting, twisty-turny, don't presume you know what's going to happen because it probably won't happen melodrama. I don't know if you feel from the first 3 episodes, but the show does keep pulling the narrative rug out from under your feet. I don't know if you feel that in watching it, but you think you know where it's going to go, and you sort of go, oh, that's what was happening in the first episode, or I didn't realise that was going on. And so it is a show that I think, and increasingly as it goes along, it narratively surprises. So I first of all looked at the landscape, the zeitgeist. Okay, we talked about the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist to me was there are some very good shows on Australian television, but when I watch them, they range from I will watch them and go, I don't care for this, or I will watch them and I will go, well, yeah, I like this, but it's not surprising me. And I wanted to write a show where people came, I think we'd stopped, and there was no ongoing narrative imperative. It's a bit like the shows like Deadwood to me, and even Game of Thrones. That's probably sin to a lot of people, but I'm making my way very slowly through Game of Thrones because every time I watch an episode, I like it, but I don't finish that episode and desperately feel the need to go on and watch another one. Say, unlike maybe a show I watched recently called The Leftovers, or watched Morning Wars last night, and I can't wait to continue to watch that. But that's just me. But it's what I call narrative imperative. Deadwood never had it. Deadwood was brilliant, but I could watch an episode of Deadwood and not watch another one for 2 months, and then I would watch it, and I made my way through it that way. A lot of Australian television, I think, Australian television drama, has good drama within the hour, but you don't necessarily finish the hour and go, I must watch the next hour.
Yeah. I
sort of wanted to write a show where once you start watching it, you really want to know what happens next. It's the old, the people waiting on the docks of Boston for the next episode of the old Curiosity Shop, screaming at the ship as it came into dock, is little Nell dead? Is little Nell dead? Mm. The ultimate cliffhanger. They came down to the dock in their multitudes, screaming. This boat came in carrying the latest episode of the magazine containing old Curiosity Shop, screaming, is little Nell dead? Is little Nell dead? So I came to it with a slight is little Nell dead attitude. I wanted people to want to keep watching. And I wanted also, though, to reinvent, this is all technical stuff. I wanted to reinvent the cliffhanger. I don't know if you've noticed, but the show finishes, but every episode begins time-wise, right at the end of the previous episode, and we see events of the previous episode from a different angle that makes you not only want to know where the cliffhanger goes, but actually adjusts your vision of what the cliffhanger meant.
Yeah. I
think you'll know what I mean, having seen it. So I wanted to play with that technique. I wanted to twist and turn. I wanted to surprise the audience. I think one of the major things that happens in the first hour, you suddenly see by episode 3 was something else entirely again than what you told it was. Don't want to do any spoilers. I hope you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I wanted to, but then I also wanted to, in a way, take 2 stories that I really liked and okay, let's start again. Genre convention. We are told that a show should be a thriller. We are told it should be a warm family drama. We are told it should be a melodrama. We are told it should be a science fiction show or whatever. One of my favorite movies ever is a Japanese movie called Audition, where the first half of the show is like Sleepless in Seattle for the Japanese. And the second half is probably one of the most unwatchably horrific horror stories I've ever seen, where a guy with a little son whose wife's died, and he can't find love. His friend, who's a movie producer, says to him, I know how you'll find your next love. I'll set up a series of faux auditions for a movie that will never get made, and I'll bring these girls in, and you can be my assistant, and you can watch the girls auditioning, and then you can choose who you want to ask out. Which he does, and then he meets this girl. And for the first half it's like Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. A scene happens halfway through where you realise this woman who he is asked out is absolutely, insanely, barkingly mad. And in that instant, because he does not have that information, nor do we, the viewer, so up to that point in his life, he's been living Sleepless in Seattle. In that moment, he's propelled into horror. Now, that is the truth. That when Takashi Miike, the director, was asked about why he did this, he said, but that is life. Mm-hmm. Nobody who gets killed by a serial killer is not living whatever their life is, genre convention-wise, prior to the moment they come across the serial killer. Yeah. Nor is the family of the girl who goes out to a nightclub, who has a normal family rafters dynamic, nor is the family of that girl who then goes to a nightclub and then somebody roofies their drink and they end up having dreadful sexual things done to them and they become blah-blah. Lindy Chamberlain, up to the point that she drove to Ayers Rock, was living whatever she was living, a Seventh-day Adventist life. After that, she became a major Hollywood thing. So what I wanted to do was come into a show where I started two genres, utterly, which are the two genres I've made my career in, domestic drama and high-stakes melodrama. And I wanted to start them in the same hour. Both ballad stories. One's I won't go into what the stories are. I think it spoils it for the audience. But you got that story with Sophia, which is sort of like Rafters in a way. And you've got the story with Philip's World, and that is, I wouldn't say dynasty. It's a bit like the show Succession. That's it's a nasty, toxic world. And they actually play parallel to each other for the first hour. And as you know, in watching it, you do not, and we've really worked to keep this from the publicity of the show so that people will be surprised when they hit the end of the hour. You don't know in what way those two worlds are going to interact until the very final moment, the last image of the hour. For the rest of the hour, they could be separated out, and they would be 2 half-hour pilots for two entirely different shows. Yeah. And I sort of wanted to do that. I found that really interesting to do. I thought the audience would find it interesting. And then I wanted to have those two shows, and the worlds don't merge quickly. No. I wanted to have those two shows sort of like do a pas de deux with each other until finally they become one dance. So that, and that is the technical side of it. But I think what that technical thing and my examination of the zeitgeist, which is the basis upon which I built the narrative, which I think is a very compelling narrative, that's the basis upon which that has fed this to make it different. Because I think having done that, the show does come. I'm playing with all my old tropes, but I've mixed them up in a way that I think makes them relatively fresh, and that was the basis. Yeah.
Well, this sort of brings me to the point, because as I said, I've watched 3 episodes so far, and when I say concern that I had about the show is that it's dubbed as a brand new Australian drama from Bevan Lee. When people think Bevan Lee, they obviously think All Saints packed to the rafters. So they are thinking that maybe this show would be of a similar theme. Then there's people that enjoy very gritty, very high-end, high-budget production values, and something that they don't only watch on Netflix. And something like Home and Away and Always Greener, it's not their cup of tea. I'm just suggesting there might be some traditionalists out there that will be surprised, and some Netflix junkies that will miss out. This is not packed to the rafters. In my view, it's something that you would see on Netflix, a very expensive, gritty, powerful, bold, intriguing mystery, something that would stack up against any British drama on TV. I suppose it would be hard for Seven to run a promo that says, this will be good because Bevan Lee created it, but also realise this is not traditional Bevan Lee. So if you're into big budget, bold, gritty drama, and would
but anybody who's seen Place knows that Rafters is not all I do. I mean, Place is very rough.
Yeah.
Place is full of murder. It's full of murder. It's full of bloody shock therapy. It's full of lies. It's full of deceit. It's full of women who survived the Holocaust by literally being prostitutes in the gangbang shops of the concentration camp.
Yeah.
Place to Call Home is a really tough show.
Mm.
And so anybody in Place knows that and also Place is a very twisty, turny narrative where a lot of the time you think you know it. One of the nicest compliments I ever got on Place was, I think it was the person who wrote about it for the New York Times, and that person wrote, and I sort of can reasonably quote it because it was like balm to my soul, "This is a show where you always think you know where it's going, and most of the time it never goes there, but where it goes you realise is absolutely where it should have gone in the first place."
Yeah.
And that's what the narrative, I think, of Place was, and increasingly became so as it went through into its later seasons. And that's sort of what the narrative of Between Two Worlds is, because wherever you think the narrative's going to go, even at the end of episode 3, which I think the first 3 episodes contained a lot of surprises, the show goes off in an entirely, I think, the right direction.
Mm.
But I would say to somebody about the central plot and why those two worlds are linked, tell me where that narrative goes, and none of them would be right.
Yeah.
And so, look, I mean, I think a Bevan Lee show.
There was a backhanded compliment in there.
Oh no! I mean,
there's some people that watch Netflix shows and they would say, I would never even watch an Australian drama, nothing, any type of Australian. They're cheap and they're whatever, and I prefer my Netflix. And I'm just suggesting that these people, hopefully listening to the podcast, you're missing out, because this is your high end. This is your, something that perhaps you would see on Netflix, or something you would see on a streaming service, or something that was, off. It's not traditional.
It's an incredibly well made. It's an incredibly well made show. I think it's an incredibly compelling show. It's got this narrative that goes like a bloody steam train. It's got a narrative that really surprises, I think, and delights, and it's got amazing characters, and it's beautifully acted. And I'm sorry, arrogance here, but it's the best writing I've ever done. Look, it's an amazing show, and I think it's sad if we are in a world where you sort of have to go out tugging your forelock cap in hand. I thank you for the backhand compliment. I know exactly what you're saying, so I'm not criticising what you're saying. I just think it's a great shame if we have to go out and say, oh, really, really trust us. We're really, really good. No, please, really, really trust us. I believe that, hopefully people will come to it. I think from the very beginning, given what happens in the first 5 minutes, I think, they'll go, oh, they killed him? And so, sorry, spoiler alert, but I don't think it spoils it at all. I think that hopefully word of mouth will get out there. Hopefully people will come on the opening night, and look, I never feel it. I never feel like, see, you go to Sons and Daughters. Sons and Daughters was very rich, quite savage storytelling, really, when you go back and look at it. Then I had what I call my domestic happiness trilogy, but I don't think that should define my career. But I think it sort of has, because my greatest successes came in that period. But I think a Bevan Lee show is whatever Bevan Lee decides to write. And in a way, this show, the answer to that is this show is a homage to the fact that I have written 2 very different styles of show in my career, and it's marrying both styles together into one show. And that marriage, I think, is, as I approach my 70th birthday, what made me want to continue writing, because I thought if I couldn't do something different, then what was the point of continuing? So we got the budget to do it. It is, I think, a show that can stand with its head held high against anything on any of the streaming services, and hopefully people will realise that. And and then maybe that will come to define, although I think it's probably my swan song, maybe that will then come to define what a Bevan Lee show is, as distinct from maybe that will wipe away people saying, you know, see, I think I was judged on place by the guy on that platform. I keep coming back to him because I think he probably had seen those other shows and thought, well, that's what this is going to be, not realizing that, you know, a writer can write different things at different times of their life. That, you know, and I couldn't have kept doing it for 40 years if I was, you know, just turning out the same old schlep all the time. I mean, God, take a gun, stick it in your mouth and pull the trigger, you know? So anyway, thank you for the backhanded compliment, and I think it's very accurately surmised.
And I guess reiterating what you said, that this is a slow burn. The premise that they have in the promos about the two worlds colliding, and this is not a spoiler because you've already said they're not going to collide in episode 1 necessarily. It does.
No, it takes a long while. But you know, that doesn't make it uninteresting. I mean, I think the two worlds unfold like two parallel shows. Yeah. And increasingly you get the sense that of how they might. But I think the thing is, I think that the interesting thing is, how are they eventually going to meet? And then once they do meet, how is that going to affect the two worlds? And even when they do meet, the worlds don't like Sons and Daughters, you know, I'm not knocking at this, but Sons and Daughters, it was very clear within the first hour exactly, and the worlds really started to invade each other very, very quickly. I mean, in this show, you've got two incredibly compelling shows going along side by side. It's very, very clear at the end of the first hour how they are going to cross. But then a lot of the narrative suspense of it is, how is this going to play out? And the narrative defying the audience expectation of the normal story choices that would take place. Yeah. And I think it does constantly defy narrative expectation. And I think that, to me, is what made me interested in writing it, rather than going back and sort of like doing a fairly, you know, obviously laid out narrative strand. I mean, and we pulled it off. You know, it does look I mean, it created huge problems. Those two worlds, you know, stylistically, do you give each world a different style? How do you marry the two worlds? How do you make two shows play side by side and not in fact cancel each other out when they're in fact not interacting with each other? And I think Creve Stenders with his visual style has done a wonderful job on that. The actors finding their different, you know, how do you marry two playing styles? The playing style of an ordinary world, seemingly, and the playing style of this heightened world. The way we married it was to say this: philosophically, the fact that ordinary lives are less interesting dramatically than high-blown wealthy lives is in fact a comforting false premise. There are an incredible number of stories out there in ordinary suburbia that are just as narratively compelling as something that might be happening in Rupert Murdoch's mansion in, not that I'm saying the character's based on Rupert, but the Rupert Murdoch's mansion like Succession. They're just as compelling. It's just that the mistake that I think writers can make is assume that they're dull. And that's why Rafters work. Because if you look at Rafters, everyone says what a light show Rafters was. But in the first hour, you had a husband who's so worried about his sexual performance on the night of his wedding anniversary that he overdoses on Viagra and has to go to the hospital to have his penis aspirated. A father who is so riddled with grief that the only way he can deal with the loss of his wife is to wear her clothes around the house when he is home, and who has a heart attack and has to be taken out on a stretcher with his, you know, with his wife's clothes on. And a daughter who's being beaten up by her crystal methamphetamine addicted boyfriend. And we wrote that at a time when meth was not as much on the public consciousness as previously. And a son, the son who is supposed to be the one to succeed, who has married a very wealthy woman and come back under the roof because they're completely broke and they don't want to go to her father for money.
Yeah.
Now, that is not light, fluffy drama.
No.
And so the reason Rafters worked was we had the humour of life around it, but we were true to the drama. And that's my point, I think, in saying all of my shows in a way that people sort of see as flummeries. If you go in and you analyse any episode, they will have a very strong dramatic base. And Suburbia is just as interesting dramatically as the world of the Rupert Murdochs. And I think that's why, having found that and performance level, the actors came in and they played it with the truth of the drama in both worlds, and therefore they married, because the drama isn't played campy in one world and kitchen sink in the other. The drama is played in both worlds, the truth of the emotion of that world. And that's why it works. And without that, I think it was on the page. But going back to you saying, are the actors important? Yeah, they were bloody important, because if they hadn't pulled that off, this show wouldn't work as it does.
Well, so actually, speaking of actors, because with the cast of this show, Hermione Norris, what a great get. We all know her from Cold Feet, of course. I mean, it's a great cast, isn't it?
Oh, look, Hermione, when they brought Hermione's name up, because listen, we live in a world these days where to get the sort of money that show required to you get made in terms of, and overseas distributors have to have a face that, isn't just one of our local people who don't cut the mustard overseas. They can go away and create a reputation over there, but there are some very, very good people here that you put their name on the marquee and they mean nothing if you're trying to show overseas, sadly, but true. So they were looking at, and they said, who could be an overseas person? I said, well, I think the only character it can be is Kate. She's the only one who doesn't have to be organically Australian for the narrative to work. And so they started looking around. When they suggested Hermione, because I only knew her work from Cold Feet, I was unsure. And then I saw a tape of something she'd done in the show Luther, and that made me feel. And then I had a chat with her via FaceTime one night. It was late at night, so it was FaceTime with the vision off, so both of us didn't scare each other with our late night appearances. And so, hers late night and me during the day. And so we had, had this lovely, and we hit it off straight away because she's got a great sense of humour. And I think you recognised in my voice, because this is a passion project for me, for the sort of, it's almost because it's a homage to both the styles I've made a career in. It was, and I love the story, and I think it's my best storytelling and my best scripting. She recognised the passion in my, I think she said in an interview in the paper today, and it's true. It's not her talking bullshit for PR. She really jumped on board because, her and I clicked over our sheer passion, my passion for the project, which I communicated to her. And then she came out, and thank God she did, because she, like Noni, brought something to the role which I'd never seen on the page, which is deliriously wonderful. And what that woman can do with the slightest tick of her right eyebrow in terms of communicating subtext is just not worth mentioning. She's brilliant. And her and Philip Quast hit it off enormously. And if that relationship hadn't worked, because the two characters are so toxic with each other, if they hadn't worked, the show wouldn't have worked. And they formed a wonderful working relationship. Philip, who is extraordinary, but you can have two extraordinary people, and if they don't mesh, and they had to mesh for it to work.
Is there
and so.
Sorry.
Go.
No, I was going to say.
So yeah, we were incredibly lucky.
I was just going to say, was there a favourite part of the show? Because for me, it was definitely that interaction between Kate and her husband Philip. It is so layered and so many elements to it, and secrets and intrigue, and oh my goodness, and those two
just
actors.
Wait. All I can say is just wait for the next 7 episodes, because if you think it's layered up at the end of episode 3, oh my God. Look, the interesting thing was, I love what Sass Weissman does with her role. She comes in a much less showy role, and she is a fine enough performer to know that she has to play the truth of that role and not chew the scenery to try and compete with what's in the other world. And for that, apart from the fact, I love her as a person, I love her as an artiste, but she did that. And all the young people who came in, Melanie, Tom, playing the twisted progeny of the twisted rich people, and that sort of like very, very crazy story. And I think it's probably the craziest story in the show, the story between them. And Megan, here's a classic example. Megan Hajar, who has a very, very significant storyline as the sister in the suburban world. Yep. Now, I wrote her, that sort of person in the family who's in the background and nobody sort of notices them, the quiet person. Yep. And that was her role in that family. The daughter who'd been eclipsed by her brother and a father who is now dead and a strong-willed mother, and who's sort of like she's just there. You take her for granted that she's there. And she was a wonderful enough little artiste to come in to those first 3 eps, because you don't really hit what her story is going to be till episode 4. And it comes out of what is established in those first 3 eps, that she is that sort of like the wallpaper. She's the person in the family who's taken for granted. And she was such a wonderful little trooper playing that and not trying to pull focus. Once again, like Sass, playing the truth and holding back until she gets to the time where I give her the storyline that allows her to soar and run with it. And that explains exactly in the storyline why she's been the woman of the first 3 episodes that you see. And so, look, they're all wonderful, really. And with all of them, I was blessed that they all came in. Blasey Best, wonderful as a nurse Sandra, to play the truth, But also, it's too, people like Dom who comes in. Dom's in one scene in the first episode and doesn't really return until episode 4. And you sort of guess because, you see him episode 1, he makes a fairly dazzling physical impression in that brief scene. You sort of figure, well, what's he there for if he just does that? And then he holds off and comes in episode 4, and by the end is one of the main characters in the show. So, once again, actors who are prepared to come in and be what they are in the moment, rather than wanting to twist the moment to be more than they should be on the tapestry at that time. Blessed in that.
This is going to be the blandest of questions, but I just thought I'd mention what else you'd like to mention about the show. The reason I say that is because I'm so hesitant to ask questions that will give away storylines, because I've seen it, and giving away anything in this show would be to the detriment of people that are watching it. It's so good. But
thank you. That is the best that's the best compliment you could give me. They've had a terrible time in promos working out how to promo the show.
That'd be the worst.
Because But it's the worst, because how the hell do you promo this show without giving away secrets? And I think you'll agree, even up to, and there's a shitload more to come. Excuse my French. The more passion I get, the more vulgar I tend to get. Each episode unfolds, more and more and more and more secrets from this Pandora's box of secrets. And one of the things about the show is it sets up a show in which one side looks like they've got no secrets, and the other side looks like they're riddled with them. But the interesting thing as it goes along is that the world of Sophia that's presented in episode 1 is riddled with just as much denial and secrets and dysfunction. It's just that it's been swept under the carpet better, and that these people in the other world, I guess, let it spill more. The two worlds, I believe, between two worlds is on the most basic level, between the worlds of Sophia and the worlds of Philip. But thematically, to me, the two worlds that it's between is the world of what we present to the world and what we hide.
Yeah.
And everybody does that. I have my Jolly Green Bev suit that I put on. I am one person in my private life, and all my friends often go, that's not you. But, and then I have the other guy, the sort of professional guy. And because I'm a pretty reclusive and not very social person, I almost have to put on my Jolly Green Bev suit to go into public amongst people, because I much prefer my friends, the characters on the page of my shows, and I actually do prefer socializing with the world. So I'm very, very aware that some people can form an opinion of me. It's absolutely got nothing to do with the inner workings of who I am. So I was very interested in doing that too. So if you look at all of these characters in the show, what you think they are, all of them in episode 1, and this is why it's very, very hard for the promos to promote, what you think they are in episode 1 is nothing to do with what they are by the time you get to the end of episode 10.
Yeah.
None of them. And so your compliment to me is like gold to my ears, because that's what the show is about. The show is about thinking where something's going, at big time, ongoingly you don't. There's not one episode where you don't have to revise your view of at least one character, if not the whole lot of them. But that's what we do in life. I mean, there's nothing, I don't know why it's not done in more drama, because usually what happens in drama pilots, you set up the pilot, you slay it out on the slab at the front. This is that one, this is that one, this is that one, moving right along. To a certain extent, Rafters did that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
It was all laid out. I'm not criticising it. That's Julie, that's Dave, he's the goofball son, he's the screw up son, she's the, and it was all laid out on the slab, and then the story's carried on from there. But life's not like that. You meet somebody, you might go out on a good first date. By date 3, you've got a crazy stalker.
Yeah.
Or you might, or our friends, the friendships, you might meet somebody and not like them. Then a year later you go, how did we form a friendship? So that, to me, is, I think, one of the ways the show is most like life. And that is, we get to know these people by degrees, just as in life we get to know people by degrees. And those are the two worlds that I think the show is between: surface perception and internal truth.
Well, the bit that's interested me in what you've said there is, as I said, I've watched 3 episodes, and I thought by the end of episode 3, you sort of get a sense of, oh, okay, this is where the show's going. But you've just sort of mentioned, if that's what's happened, what I thought up to episode 3, it's still going to keep unraveling. Now, I thought I was going to...
Trust me, whatever you think at the end of episode 3 is going to happen, it's not. And I know what you're talking about. And it is so not that big time, so not that.
I predicted
this. And I did it deliberately. I wanted the audience to go, ha, 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 I'm ahead of you. And I'm sitting at home on a Sunday night watching it going, ha, 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 you think you're ahead of me, well, you're not. So it's just my little perverse game with the audience.
Beautiful.
But it's also what I think is good. It's the sort of storytelling, if it's my swan song, and it probably is, because, look, I'm 70 in November. I see a lot of contemporaries, to be frank, dying around me. I'm a lucky enough gay guy to be HIV negative who didn't die of the big one, and many of my generation did. I've survived cancer. I'm sitting up in my eyrie here making sure, as a type 1 diabetic of my age, that COVID doesn't kill me. And so, death increasingly comes into your thoughts, without being morbid. And all I know is, when I do die, I don't want to die with a head full of characters. I want to die just me, alone in my head, with my truth. And for 40 years, I have never not lived without a head full of characters. And so I think my swan song is not necessarily that I might have run out of energy. My swan song is intimations of mortality. How boring lying there on the ground and not thinking some sort of internal truth about oneself, but going, oh, what would have Sophia done next in the plot? I mean, that's a pretty tragic last thought, you know what I mean? So that, I'm not wanting to be morbid in that, but there's this sort of existential thing that's saying to me, also, I do not want to be that guy where they go, oh, poor old darling, he had it once, he's really lost it, hasn't he? And failures, and they're not pleasant to live through. And whether this succeeds in the ratings or not, and it would be sad if it didn't, but whether it succeeds in the ratings or not, I know we made a gloriously fine show. And if I put my feet up and retire on that, then I can retire with equanimity. But if I go one too far and that doesn't work, then I have to go too far, because I cannot retire on failure. It's just not my nature.
Look, this final question.
Hope that's not too serious.
No, this final question is exactly on what you're talking about. I wanted to ask a few years back, you were interviewed, and the end of the article it said, as of the beginning of 2017, Bevan is working on season 5 of A Place to Call Home, whilst gearing back and contemplating the prospect of a well-earned retirement after nearly 40 years in the business. Now, so your definition of a break and heading to retirement was to make Between Two Worlds and Back to the Rafters. You and I have different versions of what gearing back is.
Here's the deal of why I said that then, because I was finishing Place and I was very, very happy with the way Place finished. It got its conclusion on Foxtel, a proper narrative conclusion, which it never had after 2 seasons on 7. It had that ridiculously abortive piece of bullshit ending that they put on the end of season 2 to somehow or other pretend it was wrapped up, which broke my heart. But I had been working on Between Two Worlds and been doing my early work on it. But it really didn't look like it was going to come together, because it is such an expensive show. We were going into parlous times fiscally. We are in parlous times. You know, I honestly knew it was a great show, and everybody who read it knew it was. They loved the scripts, but everybody kept saying, how will we find the money to do this? And this sort of only exists because Angus Ross, bless him, and Julie McGoran, bless her, loved it, and Angus's programmer kept wanting to push it. And then, you know, it only exists because Tim Warner, bless him, took the incredibly ballsy call given the landscape, the fiscal landscape, of saying, okay, let's do it. So we managed it. I made that statement when I didn't think, you know, this show was, even though I wanted it to, I didn't think this show was going to get up, and I wasn't prepared to do it on any basis other than the basis I felt that it could be as good as it should be. And then Rafters sort of came up out of the blue. It came out of left field with Amazon approaching 7 productions. You know, I didn't predict that, and I didn't necessarily want to do it when it did come up, and I found my way into finding a way to want to do it, you know, to respond professionally to the set of circumstances. And so that, you know, was me doing what I think was right professionally, not necessarily me doing what was right from my heart, whereas Between Two Worlds was a passion project from my heart. So I think I believed that at the time, just as I believe at the moment that this is my swan song. And maybe in 3 years' time, I don't know, I'll be contradictory and have done something else, and you'll be calling me out on it again there. But it's less likely, I think, at the moment, probably.
Well, your time has been gracious. I looked at the time and realised we could have got through 2 episodes of Between Two Worlds during this chat.
How long have we talked?
It's if it was looks like 1 hour and 35 minutes at least.
Jesus, if the audience hangs in there through this, all I can say is good on you. You've got great stamina, and I hope I haven't bored you with us.
No, it's been great. Look, I obviously wish you the best of luck for the premiere of Between Two Worlds, which premieres Sunday the 26th of July at 8:30 on 7. It really is a high and glitzy, expensive-looking drama with a fabulous cast. You're not retired yet, or you're heading to retirement, but I do want to say thank you from the entire Australian public for giving us and continuing to deliver compelling Australian stories for the last 40 years. There's just so many shows there. You're definitely in the legend status, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Look, you sit down, you start typing, then 40 years you blink and you sort of have people saying nice things to you. So I've been very blessed. It's given me a living for all that length of time, and it's allowed me to live in fantasy worlds where a lot of the time I felt more comfortable than in the real world. So I've worked very hard, but I've been a lucky fella. So, but thank you for your thanks, and I guess I thank the audience for watching. I hope they watch this one.
Yeah.
And thank you for the questions. The questions are really good. They weren't those usual pro forma things where I roll my eyes and go, really, that one again? So good on you. Thank you.
No worries.